I was working on Ukraine energy subjects before the invasion. And while there were a lot of problems, there were problems with the grid. Ukrainian grid, in terms of its reliability, was behind the indicators that Poland, let's say 20, 30 years ago, Poland and Ukraine had about the same reliability. Now Poland has 10 times more reliable grid than Ukraine did before the last invasion. There was a progress on renewables because Ukraine wanted to join the EU. It indicated in terms of policy that it's serious about the renewables. The growth of renewables was impressive, although bang for the buck. Of course, gas and nuclear are cheaper than renewables, and they're more reliable in terms of providing what we call in the business base load. But with the invasion, everything changed. Now Russia, in my opinion, is committing war crimes, crimes against humanity by destroying deliberately and systematically the Ukrainian grid. It is doing it in order to cause maximum suffering, to cause depopulation of Ukraine. And in my opinion, there's too little debate and discussion about that war strategy of Russia's. I do believe that they're violating a whole bunch of articles of the international law. I do not practice public international law, so I'll leave it to the lawyers to give us chapter, verse, and verse. But I will further on talk about something that I particularly feel strongly about, and that is how they're violating the Geneva Conventions, Protocols 1 and 2, in terms of the nuclear power. But let me step back and take a look at the macroeconomic picture, which is grim for now. And let me also say, I do a lot of energy work, but my sort of background is first legal and then political science. And as a scholar of international relations, I can tell you that the ultimate decision about the direction of this war will be in the battlefield. It's not going to be the European Union making this decision or that decision about reconstruction. That will come later. But for now, we hope and pray that ZSU, the Ukrainian Defense Forces, will this spring and summer defeat the Russians in the field in such a way that the future agreement that will come, and it will come sooner or later, will be such that the Ukrainian people will stand with their heads high and will be proud to be Ukrainians, because anything else will make this conflict even more protracted, and the Russians need to be taught a lesson that will prevent the next iteration. Because what the Russian president and the Russian government are interested now is not a real peace, is not recognition of Ukrainian independence, and definitely not a recognition of Ukrainian independence in the context of the West, in the context of the EU and NATO. They deny Ukrainians in a very, you can say, genocidal way, the right to exist as an independent people, the right to exist as an independent people. And that's why I am shocked when politicians in this country, on the far right, and in some cases on the far left and in between, the so-called realists, self-proclaimed realists, say, oh, we just need a compromise with Russia. So if Ukraine loses some territory, so be it. They don't care about it. Of course they don't, but Ukrainians do. And economic issues, energy issues will come secondary to the security issues. You saw the reports of the chairman of China, Xi Jinping. Chairman of China is a real title. He just got it. Visiting Moscow on the 21st of March, coming with this very amorphous, undefined peace plan for Russia and Ukraine. I doubt very much from what was made public that this is really a workable peace plan. And I say peace, not ceasefire, because when they're talking about freezing the line of conflict, they're not talking about territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine in the borders of 1991, not even in the ceasefire lines of 2022. They're talking about freezing it and then negotiating. That raises questions about Ukrainian security of shipment in the Black Sea. That raises questions about the Sea of Azov that Russia openly said it now became an internal Russian sea. It raises questions about the corridor to the Crimea. It is unlikely that Ukraine, as it's constituted today, would be accepting it. And then there's a whole slew of issues of security, NATO membership, EU membership that Moscow was opposing all along, and that triggered the war of 2014. The war of 2014 was not about protecting Russians in the Donbass. It was about preventing Ukrainian people from deciding where the future lies. And inflation peaked close to 30%. Now it's beginning to come down. The Central Bank of Ukraine took an aggressive stance, pushed a lot of money into the system. They provided loans, including the energy sector loans for people to buy generators. The international economic institutions were generous, freezing the debt repayments. However, in terms of the private sector, some lenders were not so generous and tried to go for courts for enforcement of the existing conditions, disregarding the fact that this is a force majeure. The energy sector, I think, probably the most important thing, and Adrian will correct me if this was already resolved, but when I was preparing this presentation, we were talking about generators, bringing generators, especially the big generators that cost $2 to $4 million each, was a challenge. There was just not enough stock and production capacity in the world to bring them. They're multi-ton, hundreds of tons weight, so it's difficult to transport them. Then there's a discussion about restoring the grid during bombing, restoring generating capacity. It is difficult to restore. Generating capacity may take months and months to restore. Grid is a little bit easier, provided you have all the components. This is a test case that goes beyond Ukraine. It has a global significance because the Russians did not leave the reactors alone. They overran them, they took control of them, they put troops in them, and then they start screaming when the Ukrainians are returning fire at the sources of fire that originates from these reactors. So the Russians are violating Geneva Convention Protocol 1 and 2. It talks about dangerous forces, and nuclear is probably one of the most dangerous forces that we are aware of. And if the reactors are not demilitarized entirely and left alone, number one, horrible accidents can happen, up to and including the meltdown of the reactors. The Ukrainian reactors beyond Chernobyl are more modern, have contained structures. There's somewhat less of a chance of a meltdown, but it exists. And one of the factors is the security and availability of personnel. However, if the Russian troops are coming and personnel runs and abandons these reactors because they are unsafe, or personnel is exhausted and stressed by the hostilities, by the artillery fire, or small arms fire, can't sleep, and then goes to their shift, they may make mistakes that can be catastrophic. And the thought is Ukraine is going to be pinched for dollars for currency, euros, hryvnias, after this war ends. And as such, the job one is going to be to have abundant and affordable energy. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what we used to call the Paris Hilton solution. Paris Hilton decided to pick up a fight with the late, great Senator John McCain in 2008 when McCain ran for president. And McCain said, "Oh, fossil fuels." And Paris said, "No. She had an energy policy." Said all of the above. And in the case of Ukraine, it's going to be a Paris Hilton solution, all of the above. It's going to be gas. It's going to be coal if it's economic. It's going to be renewables and, of course, nuclear that will have to be rebuilt. Ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be one of the biggest rebuilding projects in post-World War II history. The numbers that are thrown around now are between $380 billion to $1 trillion. It's not going to be $1 trillion because just you see what's going on in the world. This bank goes out of business. Credit Suisse just got 54 billion, but it's going to be billions and billions of dollars. It probably mostly will have to come from Europe because the US is putting so much money on the war and the Europeans are putting less, and Ukraine is in Europe's neighborhood. But to what extent this is going to be green, to what extent it's not going to be green, we will see. The biggest challenge I see with solar and wind is intermittency. The wind doesn't always shine and the sun doesn't always blow. Oops, vice versa. The wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine. So what do you do at night? What do you do on a day where there's neither, no light and no wind? And the answer is storage, and storage is too expensive. We don't have the technological solution for storage. Yes, you can build more and more capacity and hope that that capacity provides some semblance of a baseline. I think we're not there yet, neither technologically nor economically. So nuclear, gas, coal, and when I say gas, Morgan mentioned LNG. I worked on LNG with an Odessa-based company in 2014 in the first war, and we wanted a terminal in Odessa. And of course, Mr. Erdogan, the great ally of the West, said, "Yok, no." And then he referred us to his son-in-law, who was Minister of Energy, and said, "Talk to the boy and he'll help you." And what the Turks wanted to do, they wanted to have the LNG terminals and then have a pipeline into Ukraine, but they would control both the money and the flow of gas. I do believe we can come back to this conversation, especially if Mr. Erdogan is going to build that Erdogan Canal bypassing Bosphorus, and that the purpose of that canal is to increase traffic between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. And in that traffic, you can bring, you should be able to bring in the future LNG tankers, take them all the way to Odessa, and that's, God willing, when the Black Sea will be free from the Russian threat. So as long as Ukraine wins this war, the future is bright. There'll be a lot of rebuilding and reconstruction opportunity, grid generation, increase of renewables, but not exclusively renewables. And Ukrainian people is one of the most hardworking, talented, and heroic people in the world. And I'm sure they will manage to get the corruption under control, the bureaucracy under control, and rebuild the economy. If we lose the war, it's a scenario I don't want to talk about right now. Thank you, and I'll be happy to answer questions. Just second that, Morgan. First of all, in terms of ancient history, about 20 years ago, I was nominated to be the US co-chair for the US-Ukraine Dialogue Economic, US-Ukraine Dialogue Economic Part or Economic Group. I headed the Russian, Ukrainian, and Eurasian Studies at the Heritage Foundation at the time. I can tell you that for 20 years, my colleagues and I felt like a broken record. We kept saying the same thing again and again. Bring the bureaucracy under control, cut corruption, punish corruption, improve the courts. Without that, foreign investment doesn't come. The capital is a coward. It wants to come where it is secure and safe and where it can make money. And the second point that Morgan made, I remember being in Kyiv in 2015, dealing with that exact point, the overbearing influence of the state in general and of Naftogaz in particular on the Ukrainian gas sector. And investor after investor coming to me and telling me that they are discouraged, hurt, abused, and leaving. And then I did have a friend who was a part of that American consortium that won a bid for gas development. And I also was aware of both Yulia Tymoshenko as the prime minister and the successor governments trying to mess with American investors, offshore and onshore exploration and production in oil and gas. So that track record, I don't want to bash Ukraine in the middle of the war, but in terms of lessons learned, I think this is the time to learn this lesson. You cannot punish private investors, keep them away. State companies, there's a huge body of research from the World Bank and elsewhere. State companies do not do as good of a job in oil and gas and in other sectors as private companies. They don't have the experience, they don't have the same KPIs. This is not the way to go to develop your energy sector. Regulation, of course, monitoring, safety, compliance, all these good stuff that state can do and should be doing. But in terms of exploration and production, being able to make a buck and yes, repatriate profits, that is and should be in the hands of the private sector. Well, I just want to say that when you say green energy, the most advanced technologies right now is wind and solar. Just look at the map and check. Ukraine is not in North Africa. It's not Uzbekistan that have 360 days out of 365 with sun. So solar would not be the most effective and efficient way to do it. Wind, I don't know enough about the wind map of Ukraine. Maybe Adrian can fill it, but both sources are intermittent. And unless you have a very effective, cost-effective storage, you do not have that supply as a base load, as something that you can turn on, turn off, and is readily and abundantly and cheaply available. So I think Ukraine now is what, Adrian, 8 or 9%, not counting hydro, is solar and wind, if that, maybe less, and maybe several more percentage points. But I do not see for the next 20 years, without storage being really cheap. Today's storage is mostly lithium-ion batteries that are very expensive. And then people are tinkering with some other technologies, getting water up to a reservoir, and then water goes down and rotates a turbine. So the storage is a challenge. And also you need a grid that is much more modernized, much more nimble than the early 20th century grid that in some cases 100 or more years old. So the grids that were built for coal and then switched to gas and nuclear are not the same grids as you need for the renewables. I've spoken about this topic at a big conference with pretty senior people in Paris in the end of November. I should be publishing something about it, but the bottom line is this. If this was a war between small, insignificant powers, countries, it would be one thing. Unfortunately, one of the 5 nuclear powers is involved in that, and it is the one that is breaking the status quo. It's Russia. It's paradoxical because Russia is one of the greatest exporters of nuclear reactors and nuclear fuel, and they are, as always or as often, are cutting the branch that they're sitting on. They destroyed their own hydrocarbon market in Europe. That was the big moneymaker for them. And now they're destroying, potentially, the nuclear industry, that also they were a big player. Having said that, I think this is one of these areas that we need to talk to China about, because China, Japan, and others are interested in the nuclear industry development. And more specifically, I would say that in Ukraine, the nuclear waste can and should be reprocessed. Either in Ukraine itself, you build a breeder reactor that reprocesses the waste fuel. We don't have it in this country, but the French know how to do it. The Russians know how to do it. And secondly, we need to recognize, Adrian said that the Ukrainian reactors are good till, what, 2040? But these reactors, remember, were built by the Soviet Minatom, the Ministry of Nuclear Energy and Nuclear Power, was called the Ministry of Medium Machine Building, to make it secret. It was built in the 1960s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. These reactors are getting old, and we need to start thinking, including in Ukraine, about new technologies, small and medium modular reactors that are safer and that can be dispersed and less dangerous. So instead of having 10 large, expensive reactors, we can have 30 smaller, safer reactors that are contained systems that do not require a lot of service. You basically bring them, install, plug in into the grid, and they work. So that's another thing in terms of modernization and rebuilding after the war we can think about. Finally, just to hammer the point that Morgan was making earlier, I hope after the war, working more closely, working together with American and European policymakers, regulators, private sector companies, etc., we will have a different investment climate in Ukraine. I do not hold my breath. Investment climate is often a function of a cultural mindset, if you wish, a culture of openness or lack thereof, of corruption or less thereof. And it will be a challenge to prevent the government officials and bureaucrats to block the development of private sector-based hydrocarbon industry in Ukraine. But I really hope that after the war, there'll be such a huge mindset shift that it will be done. And by the way, I would add, Adrian, I'll let you speak in a second. I would add that maybe we should start thinking about how you write the rules for investment and revise and re-examine the institutions, the regulatory institutions for investment as a condition of the Western assistance. So you say you shrink the ability of government companies to be involved themselves in exploration and production as a condition for our assistance in rebuilding Ukrainian energy sector after the war. Final comments are that these are the precarious times that people who are the leaders and the managers of our security have to address the security issues, whereas the economic leaders have to address the future of the Ukrainian economy and of the Ukrainian energy. Clearly, this is an opportunity to build the Ukrainian economy for the 21st century. This is a time where the Soviet and post-Soviet most problematic legacies and practices can be left in the past, and Ukraine can look at the leading examples, good examples of most advanced economy and most advanced energy sector. And by that, I don't only mean oil and I don't only mean solar and wind, because, for example, after the investment of 400 billion euros, Germany is generating something like 5% only from wind and solar. So you need to look at a broader picture. And as Morgan pointed out, you need to allow Western companies to come in, and you have a situation in Europe where Germany and other countries with the predominance of the green lobby are perfectly fine importing electricity from nuclear, from coal, from other countries, but they will not allow this in their backyard. Maybe this is an opportunity for Ukraine. People mentioned in the chat that you should put energy facilities outside of the Ukrainian borders. For now, in a temporary fashion, maybe you can put it in Poland and elsewhere, just import electricity from Poland. But in the longer term, with Ukrainian industrial capacity, Ukraine did and can export energy to Europe in the future, and I hope and pray that it will be in the position to do it sooner rather than later. Thank you so much.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to get more content like this.